So let's start. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the opening event of the American, Asian, and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. To start this event, I would like to share some historic remarks leading to this celebration. It's always important to know what the things is happening and when they started. Back in May 1843, it was recorded the first Japanese immigration to the United States of America. Manjiro, a 14-year-old fisherman that, according to the National Endowment of the Humanities, was caught in the violent storm and rescued 5 months later by an American whaling ship. Manjiro was adopted by American Captain William Whitfield and brought to the States in Massachusetts. Eventually, Manjiro returned to Japan and became a political emissary between his home country and the West. He was called the first American ambassador to Japan. Later, in May 1869, it was recorded the completion of the first transcontinental railroad. The construction work involved an immense amount of manual hard labor that was primarily done by many thousands of immigrants, workers from China. How this celebration started? In 1972, President
You're on mute, Ileana.
Since when?
Like, since, I don't know, 20 seconds?
No,
Okay.
not that much. More like five or 10 seconds.
Okay, in 1972, President Jimmy
is.
Carter signed the annual celebration for a week. In 1992, Congress established May as Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month as a national period for recognizing the contribution and influence of Asian Americans and Pacific Islander Americans to the history, culture, and achievement of the United States. In 2004, Miami-Dade College founded the committee at the Hialeah campus. 2 years later, in 2006, Padron Campus created the committee to join this celebration by collaborating with community partners and hosting lectures, workshops, art exhibitions, and artistic performances. As a committee, we would like to extend the celebration at all MDC campuses. But today, now, we are grateful to have in the opening event our guest and honorary member, Dr. Mohammad Homayunbash, founder director of Jaffer Institute for Interfaith Dialogue and Education at Miami-Dade College.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ileana. And good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me loud and clear. Today, we do have a very, very interesting, and as I said in my email to the faculty, really an eye-opening event. My name is Dr. Mohammad Homayunbash, and as Ileana mentioned, I'm the founding director of the newly established Jaffer Institute for Interfaith Education and Dialogue. So what we do at the Jaffer Institute is really to create a student-centered ecosystem and to introduce new interdisciplinary courses to FIU's course offerings. Now we have 6 courses in total that you can pick and choose from. And another component of our work is to bring in guests like today's guest, Grisel, from other institutes of higher education, and also invite some community members to really engage in inclusive dialogue surrounding these issues of topical concern that sometimes they do make our news cycle, sometimes like today's event, not so much. But our speaker today, Grisel Violena, is, as you see on the flyer, she's an adjunct professor of religious studies department, and I think women and gender studies department and honors college at FIU. She's done some unique work I believe in the United States in general, in the sense that she belongs to that, you know, increasingly rare, you know, species of activist academics who go onto the field and really do the hard, sometimes risky work of gathering data, interviewing, you know, folks in, you know, in remote places. In this case, the refugee camps for, you know, Rohingya Muslims in Bangladesh. And she has done that in the past. And I believe, you know, according to what she's told me recently, she's planning on going over there in the upcoming months and do further research on the plight of the Rohingya Muslims in you know, in Bangladesh and so forth, which will become part of her dissertation, which I'm really looking forward to be completed and turned into, I think it's going to be an amazing book. So so that's, you know, the a quick intro to our speaker. And you know, the Rohingya Muslims, I was just talking to Grisel a little bit before the event. I think this is one of those interesting and, like I said, maybe underreported, sometimes unreported topics that we really learn to educate ourselves as faculty, as students, as community members, a little bit more about. I have, you know, in my capacity as teaching international law at FIU, I've looked into the plight of Rohingya, but in the context of you know, stateless people, but also within the context of the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, which, as some of you might know, identifies, you know, 4 core international crimes: genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and you know, the crime of aggression, which is not what we'll be dwelling on today. So almost, except for the crime of aggression, genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and also the crime of apartheid, which, by the way, is mentioned as part of the crimes against humanity in that Rome Statute, I think applies to varying degrees to the Rohingya Muslims. So that is the kind of the legal framework, if you will, within which maybe this this talk could also be contextualized. But without further ado, I just want to toss it over to Grisel, and I believe she's going to be talking for about 40-45 minutes. And then Natasha Steves of ISED from our own Padron campus, when then we'll take it over for Q&A. All right, Grisel, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let me just make sure that I can share my screen. Yes, awesome. Here we go. Okay. All right, so first of all, thank you for that awesome introduction. I like to keep things very simple when I lecture. I try to provide an overview of my work with the Rohingya, for the Rohingya, as general as possible so that all audiences understand it and are impacted by it, because I think that that's the most fundamental element in being able to advocate for refugees of this sort. So let's jump right into it. I guess I'll start with regional orientation so that everyone knows where these places are located, right? So this is Myanmar, and Myanmar is located between Thailand, India, Bangladesh, Laos, and China, right? So those are all the countries that are bordering Myanmar. I specifically went to a little town down here in Sangkhlaburi, Thailand, which was clearly on the border of Myanmar and Thailand. There, I was able to work with 140 displaced peoples. They were, there was only 2 Rohingya there, but most of them were ethnic minorities stemming from different places and ethnic tribes in Myanmar, and they were escaping the military regime. Don't worry, I'm going to go much further into detail, but that's kind of just to give you an overview of the location and the places. So after I discovered what was happening in Myanmar with the Rohingya, I decided to visit Mandalay, right? So when I speak of the Buddhist terror, U Ashin Wiratu, that is his name, this is the region that I'm speaking of. When I talk about the refugee camps, I am talking about Cox's Bazar, which is right here in, and I'm sorry, does everyone see my mouse? Can somebody let me know if you see my mouse when I point?
Yes, we can.
Okay, cool, thank you. I'm sorry, I can't see right now, I'm just looking at my presentation. So those are all the areas that we're gonna be talking about. This is where I did my research, right on the border, and I crossed the border and got to know what that kind of trek was like for the refugees that I was working with in Thailand. This is where the refugees are now in the camps. This is where the Buddhist terror lives, right? And just for reference, this is the capital, Myanmar, Yangon, which is formerly known as Rangoon. Banun Rock Children's Home is the place where I volunteered. So if anyone who listens to this gets inspired, I definitely recommend you hit me up later and we will talk about how you can get there and volunteer too. So I think these are very important terms, and I apologize for anyone who's very familiar with them, but again, I love for everyone to be on the same page. So we're going to talk about statelessness, right? So Rohingya are stateless refugees, right? So a person who is someone who is not considered a national by any kind of country, state, right? Any kind of state under the operation of law. So some stateless people are also refugees, which is the case of the Rohingya in Bangladesh. And then, however, not all refugees are stateless, right? So, and then there's many more people who are stateless, but have never crossed an international border. So therefore, they're not refugees, right? Then you have refugees, who's a person who's being forced to leave their country of birth, right, in order to escape war, persecution, or any kind of natural disaster. Then you have state actors, who is a person who is acting on behalf of a governmental body and is therefore subject to limitations imposed on the government by the government. And then you have non-state actors, which Rohingya in this case are non-state actors, right? Which is an individual or an organization that has significant political influence, but is not allied to any particular country or state, right? Because Myanmar does not accept them as citizens, which again, I will go over this later, but I just want you to be familiar with these terms. And I also move my hands a lot when I speak, so I'm sorry if that makes you uncomfortable. I'm Cuban. So I love this quote because this was a book that I read, which is a testimonial from a Rohingya man who is now a citizen of Australia. And his name is Habibi Burrahman. And the name of the book is They Erased Our Name. And he says, the story of every Rohingya man, woman, and child deserves to be told. These people whose futures have been destroyed are the first to whom I pay tribute. The one voice of Myanmar has not spoken for us. And so now we have to speak for ourselves. And he went through so much getting that book published. And it really did make an impact on me as a person who has no ties to Myanmar, has no ties to Islam. I was absolutely moved, and I had nothing else but to search for empathy while learning about the Rohingya. So there have been several community disturbances within the Rohingya community, and a lot of people don't know this. A lot of people think, oh, okay, those are all the refugees that there was this, big thing in Myanmar in 2017, and this has been going on for years prior to 2017. As a matter of fact, it all began in 1977 during the operation called Nagamin, which is known as King Dragon, which alleged that all the Rohingya were illegal immigrants and that they were raping and murdering Buddhist locals, right? So again, the Rohingya are a small Muslim community in the northern part of Myanmar in the Arakan state. There's been evidence of their residency there for many, many hundreds of years. However, in 1977, someone decided, hey, you know what? I don't want them here anymore. And there's lots of reasons behind that, but in 1982, just a couple years later, Ne Win, who was the president of Myanmar at the time, he initiated this thing called the 1982 Citizenship Act, right? Where he seized power over Myanmar, which was back then, it was called Burma. You will also see that I call Myanmar, Myanmar, which is the official UN name. It was also given to them by the military junta. However, Burma was given to them by the British, right? So while it's totally okay to use it interchangeably, the locals use it interchangeably. I prefer to go with what the UN named them instead of what the British named them. It's okay with the locals, whatever you use. So it was the 1982 Burma Citizenship Law, and they declared 135 ethnic groups in Myanmar, right? With the majority being Burman, which meant you were Buddhist with Chinese ancestry, and you had a lighter skin tone, right? So all the other ethnic tribes, like such as Mon, Karen, Kachin, all of them were also declared official ethnic minorities, but the Rohingya were completely left out of this, right? So the reason that he said that the Rohingya were not going to be declared citizens was because they couldn't show proof, and they didn't have adequate documentation to prove that they were in residence in the Rakhine state, which is also known as Arakan, prior to the year 1823, right? And he chose the year 1823 specifically because that was during a war in which everyone's house was set ablaze. I mean, when you think war, you think, complete destruction. So a lot of the people in Myanmar, whether they're Rohingya or not, do not have any kind of proof or deeds to homes or birth certificates or photos or anything of that kind, because it was the Anglo-Burmese war. So they knew that they weren't going to have that kind of documentation to prove that they had been there before. However, during my field work there, I did bring up the evidence that I found the most striking, which is from Francis Buchanan, and we will go into more detail about what he said in his findings later. But there is proof of the Rohingya's existence there since 1799, and even before that, but at least in print, 1799, and it's still denied and ignored and dismissed as misinformation. So run on over to 1991, and you had Operation Pitaya, which is Operation Clean Nation, right? So when you think of Clean Nation, you think of the dehumanization of a specific group, which in this case was the Rohingya. So they performed an ethnic cleansing and called it just as that. So in 2012, which is actually when I started, in 2012 was when I began investigating all of this, right? So that's when 150,000 Rohingyas were forced into these camps. They're called IDPs, so internally displaced persons. They were placed into camps in Sittwe and all the surrounding areas, and they were not allowed to be a part of Myanmar society. Then in 2017, which is probably what you've heard about, the military launched an onslaught on the Rohingya, resulting in over 700,000 of them fleeing to Bangladesh. There have been several interviews with the Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh that indicate cruel killings, rapes, and the burning of Rohingya villages. I will say that from here forward, it will get graphic, and if there's any kind of triggers with sexual assault or anything of the such, very, very violent. Unfortunately, the story of the Rohingya cannot be told without putting that into perspective. So as non-state actors, right, one of our important terms, they're othered, right? So what does it mean when someone is othered, right? You're not a part of the general population. You are not a part of the Burmese citizens. So they're othered by their own polity, and they don't fit into the political discourse among members of the international community because they're non-state actors. They're stateless, right? So it's very difficult for the Rohingya to find support within the international community because of this. And in most cases, the Rohingya are in constant cycles of statelessness or refugee or asylum seekers who later, no matter what, they're always stateless. So they remain on the margins of society without any solution or international law to cling to for both protection and justice. And I guess I always, you know, it's so difficult to talk about the Rohingya sometimes without, you know, coming off as someone who doesn't believe in our international community. But unfortunately, there's a lot left to be desired in terms of who is helping and what they're doing for the Rohingya, right? Like, where is the international community of both Muslims and international organizations? While I can vouch that the UN and the UNHCR and the World Food Program, and, you know, there's several agencies and smaller communities of NGOs that aid in terms of emergency aid, you know, by providing food and camps. And I mean, what Bangladesh has done in terms of opening their doors is absolutely incredible, but it's not enough. You cannot, in 2018, for example, I went to the UNHCR to go speak to some UN representatives and ask them about what the big plan was for the Rohingya, right? I knew they were trying to raise 972 million. And I believe at the time we only had 127 million for funding out of that 972 goal. And the only thing that was said was, our job is to provide shelter during emergency, right? And there's really nothing much that we can do outside of that. So the big plan for the Rohingya, you ask, is to keep them in camps for the next 10 years. That is the big goal, right? Let's move on forward. So back to when I said, well, there's lots of evidence that they've been there before, right? That they've been there longer than the opposition claims. So the historical timeline is 788 CE is the furthest back that I have discovered that there was evidence that both Arakan Muslims and Buddhists use Rohingya language. So obviously, if Rohingya language was in existence, so are the Rohingya, right? So, and then between 1430 and 1785, Muslims in Arakan are mentioned in the Maru dynasty. And then Buddhists delegitimize this claim by stating that they were a mere minority brought in as Bengali captives and mercenaries, right? So it's that whole, think of it this way, you know how during Donald Trump's administration, he called Mexicans violent and rapists and et cetera, and he generalized Latinos on a scale that was just inaccurate, right? Well, it's the same thing in that sense right here, where they delegitimize their existence by calling them rapists, criminals, and it's just, you know, it doesn't have much backing either. Then we have 1824 to 1826. The British colonization did cause a large scale of immigrations of Chittagonian Muslims, and these Muslims married the other Muslims that were there, which led to present-day Rohingyas. But that was just an addition, right? So I mean, obviously that happened between 1824 and 1826, which is also another reason why they chose that date, right? So that they can say that all Rohingyas are this specific migration, which even if it was, right? Even if it was, let's pretend for 1 second we haven't found the evidence from 788 and we haven't found the evidence from 1799 and 1430 and whatnot. If someone has lived in a country since 1824, is it okay in 1982 to say, you know what, I changed my mind, I don't want you here? I can't rationalize that, right? And of course, I'm not a Myanmar government official and I have no say, but those are my 2 cents in terms of that even in the worst case scenario, I don't think that it would be justified to decide that even people who were there from 1824 don't belong there. So in 1799, as I mentioned before, Francis Buchanan, right? He was a surgeon from the British East India Company. He documented that he met a group of Arakan settlers who called themselves Rohingya, right? Or natives of Arakan. While observing the natives and deciphering the dialects of their language, he referred to them as Mohammedans, Muslims, who were Burma Empire natives that derived from the Hindu nation, right? So that probably means the Hindu nation that they migrated somewhere from Bangladesh or India. So in comes U Ashin Wiratu, right? And you can see his name spelled right here. So I had the absolute pleasure of spending 30 days of my life next to this man. And he is known as Time Magazine's Buddhist bin Laden. That's what they called him, the Buddhist terror. Well, actually, that's what he calls himself. It wasn't even Time Magazine that dubbed him that. He actually called himself that, and he like takes this big pride in it. This guy was an egomaniac, and I love that I'm talking to MDC students right now because I think this is very, very important, right? I grew up, you know, in a working class family. Well, actually in a lower class family. My mom was on welfare most of my life. I dropped out of high school by the time I was like 15 years old. I didn't go back to college and I didn't get a GED and I went to community college and then I went to FIU. But I didn't do all of this until I was 30. I'm 40 now. So it's only been 10 years since I received the education that I have today, right? And it was all very, very new to me and very shocking because obviously I'm first gen. No one in my family has ever been to college. I was the first. So I had to navigate these arenas very, it was a weird moment, right? But I also noticed that I was a little different than my peers in terms of the things that I was willing to do for research. And this was one of them. I'm not saying, you know, go spend 30 days with a terrorist, but I am saying that whatever you put your mind to and you know your subject and you know what you want to do and you want to advocate for a specific group, especially if you've been through hardships, nothing's going to stop you and you're going to do well and you're going to do great. I never in my life thought that I'd be lecturing a ton of students. I never thought I'd be teaching, you know, 3 classes per semester. I never thought I'd be doing a PhD. All this stuff, right? So I just kind of wanted to throw that in there in case it possibly inspires anybody who's thinking about doing some kind of crazy research. So I decided to go to Myanmar, and against my mentors, again, I probably shouldn't be saying this either, but you know, my mentor was like, listen, why don't you stick to interviewing nuns and kind of figuring out and navigating those arenas and seeing how women are treated in Myanmar, and maybe let go of this Rohingya thing because, you know, I don't think he's going to talk to you. And I don't want you to be put in any kind of danger. And I was like, you know, I hear you and I completely understand, but I'm somebody's mother. Like, you have nothing to worry about. I'm not going to put myself in a situation where my life is going to be in danger. Right. So I went to Myanmar, and I ended up grabbing, you know, I ended up staying near the monastery for 30 days, and I would go every day, and I got my interview with Wiratu, and he was, you know, exactly as I had researched and suspected. I had hypothesized that this man was such an egomaniac that if I played my cards right, I was going to get a lot of information out of him, and I did. He came into the limelight after becoming involved with a nationalist 969 movement, right? So that was in 2001. By 2003, he received a 25-year prison sentence after being jailed by the military junta, right? Which is the government of Myanmar. Then by 2012, he was released under amnesty, and he decided to start touring Myanmar, right? Stirring up hatred against Muslims. And the reason he created the 969 movement was actually because every single shop that Muslims could shop at, so that they know that everything is within their restrictions, had a 786 on it. So he decided that everything Buddhist was going to be 969. So it was just to deter everyone from purchasing things that had a 786 on it and focus on 969, right? So 2015, which is when I met him, he used really vulgar words to criticize UN Special Envoy Yang Yi Lee. And he actually said that, and I don't support this language, but I have to explain it. So he used the words Kalar lover, which at the time I was like, what is that? And then I realized that pretty much equals to saying N-word lover. And it's a derogatory, so it's like saying the N-word to anyone who comes from Bangladesh or India or South Asia, right? So that's what he called her, and that's actually what he asked me if I was that while I was interviewing him. And I was kind of giving away that, I sought answers to his hatred for the Rohingya. It was intense. In 2017, he was banned by state body from public preaching anymore after, this was years and years and years of vitriol and inciting people to commit horrible acts against the Rohingya. And then in 2019, he was banned by Thailand from entering, which is crazy because he used to pull up into Thailand all the time with his Louis Vuittons. And here's the thing. So I'm a religious studies scholar who turned into an international relations scholar. But in terms of Buddhist ideals, this man went against the grain on a lot of fronts. He's supposed to be a Buddhist monk. And not only was he causing hatred against a group of people because of their religion, but he was also obviously calling UN envoys whores and N-word lovers, right? So there was a lot to kind of reconcile with him that was not okay in terms of Buddhist values. So here I am interviewing him. And at this specific moment, if you can see, I know the picture's kind of blurry, but this man had pictures of himself all over this office, right? Pictures of himself, just portraits everywhere. So here he is looking at me. And yes, that is definitely a condescending look. And this one is giggling. This was my homie, Upinya Jota. He was absolutely amazing. I love that man so much. If there is any monk who lives by the true life of the Buddha, it is Upinya Jota. And I was very lucky to have him because he served not only as a translator, but he facilitated a lot of my work in Myanmar and granted me access to places that usually people would not be able to go. So, in the case of the 969 movement, right, which Uwashin Wiratu is the leader, here is his name for anyone who is wondering how to spell that. In the case of the 969 movement, human actions are determined by religio-political discourse that serves as both governmental and moral law, right? So it's kind of funny how they are critiquing a specific group, right, of Muslims, and they're calling them terrorists, and they're calling them, and mind you, there is no evidence, at least not at this time. There was no evidence to back up those type of claims. And this is exactly what groups like fundamentalist extremist groups like ISIS do, right? So he was actually mimicking the people that he was accusing the Rohingya of being, and which they were not, but he sure was. So his rhetorical support for driving out Muslims is defense of the Sasana. So Sasana is, for anyone who does not know, it is the Buddhist community, right? So it is the Buddhist doctrine, the Buddhist literature, the Buddhist monks, the monastics. It is the Buddhist community, the Sasana. And then the 969 monks, which is his group, right? They defend their actions in the name of protecting the Sasana and disregarding the detrimental effects of their actions upon the Rohingya. So there's a history of dehumanization, just kind of like I made that comparison with ISIS and the 969 movement. The same kind of tools that have been used by many, many different people in the past are used against the Rohingya, right? European colonizers carried out violent agendas against people of color during colonization, right? In order to profit off the stolen land, they held natives captive and forced them to work all the lands for free. These uses of force by a majority echo the actions of the Myanmar government as heard in the retelling of the events of the Rohingya. Like many Rohingya women, African and indigenous women and little girls were captured and raped by their oppressors. Rape is something that is used as a tool for war, and it's happened over and over again, and it's always coupled with dehumanization in terms of comparing people to animals. For example, during World War II, the Japanese were depicted as vermin and louse in official US Marine Corps publications. Smith, he wrote an incredible book about dehumanization. If anybody wants to read that, please send me an email later. I will give you my information. He notes that white Allied soldiers dehumanized the Japanese as rats, apes, monkeys, and insects, but had no such attitudes toward Germans, whom they considered men of their own race, right? The difference in attitudes produced a difference in behavior, which is really, really crazy, right? So US Marine Corps depicted Asians as such, right? As rats, apes, monkeys, and insects, but the Nazis, because they saw themselves, their image in the Nazis in terms of whiteness, and Western features, they weren't depicted as such. While I'm not saying that they didn't, that they didn't take care of the Nazis, they did, but there wasn't much dehumanization involved there, and that's kind of scary. Then there's the Hutu called the Tutsi cockroaches, and Waratu, for example, calls the Rohingya African carp because they breed often. The African carp, I mean, and they call them mad dogs. He calls them mad dogs as well. So the dehumanization of the Rohingya isn't just veiled in this straightforward dehumanization. It's also veiled in diplomacy, and I will get into Aung San Suu Kyi in a couple slides so that you can understand how you don't have to necessarily be straightforward to dehumanize people. It's sometimes it's done very diplomatically. So one of the Buddhist texts that Wiratu used to justify his actions against the Rohingya was only one. Okay, so this is a Buddhist text that is about a war that was won by the Buddhists against It was against people there was several Muslims. I want to say about 700 Muslims died in this war, right? So the text reads as such: only 1.5 human beings have been slain here by thee, O Lord of men. The one had come into the 3 refuges, right? Which is what the Buddhists have to take on when they become Buddhists. So the 3 refuges, right? So meaning that the one is actually the only Buddhist, right? And then the other had taken himself 5 precepts. So there's a total of 8. And this person had taken 5. So then that made them half humans. So they were half Buddhist. So only 1.5 human beings out of the 700 people that died, right? This is an ancient text that is in Buddhist text, right? So nationalists use texts like this to justify violence against the Rohingya in terms of, well, they're not even human anyway, in terms of Buddhist values. It's kind of like when you hear Christian nationalists use the Bible to justify violence against the LGBT community or women, et cetera, right? So the dehumanization in Buddhism, it is the defense of the sasana, which we already went over. It comes in the Buddhist text, right? And the text is microaggressive, right? So if you don't know what microaggressive is, it's kind of like the first example that came into mind is, have any of you ever heard a white person tell a Black woman, oh, wow, you're pretty for a Black girl, or those type of backhanded compliments that you're just like, excuse me? So microaggressions come in all those forms. And that is used all the time in terms of Buddhist culture against the Rohingya, where they don't even consider them human. But if you talk to a local, for example, they'll just tell you, well, yeah, they just don't belong here. And there's no hatred and there's no blatant disrespect, but you're sitting there saying, how can you just sit back and allow this to happen to people who live in your community who've never done anything to you, right? And then we have Aung San Suu Kyi, right? So I'm not sure how familiar all of you are with her, but she is the leader of the National League for Democracy. She was a recipient of a Nobel Peace Prize while she was imprisoned for 15 years for her role in undermining the military junta in Myanmar. You know, when I first heard about who Aung San Suu Kyi was, it was because I watched a documentary about her. And I remember crying, sobbing, watching that documentary, thinking about how a woman was locked up for 15 years and missed the death of her husband. She missed her children growing up. She missed so much of her life. And, you know, I just thought, my gosh, I hope they release her soon. And sure enough, they did, because I was exposed to it maybe a year before she finally got released. And then once she was released, I was severely disappointed. And, you know, it pains me to say this, because if you go to Myanmar, Aung San Suu Kyi is, I mean, she is glorified like a saint. It is the most incredible worship I have ever seen of a politician. And, you know, I just couldn't believe that once she did finally gain that power, right, in 2015, where she was officially elected as the National League for Democracy leader, and, you know, they had a place within society. I mean, I guess now it's very telling that this whole time, because of the recent coup, right, I guess it's very telling that it was all really a sham and that she was just a pawn But I would think that somebody who is so outspoken like Aung San Suu Kyi and considered, you know, a Nobel Peace Prize laureate, you know, you would think that she would have a little more dignity in terms of standing up to the military. I mean, but she didn't, right? So in the last 5 years, 6 years, because we are in 2021, wow. So in the last 6 years, she actually made things, you know, helped contribute to making things worse for the Rohingya. In December of 2019, she traveled to The Hague to speak on Myanmar's behalf, so on behalf of the military, at the International Court of Justice. So in the case of the Gambia v Myanmar, which is the only open case in the international court system against Myanmar for its atrocities against the Rohingya and classified as genocide. So Suu Kyi was presented with accounts of Rohingya executions, infants flung to their death, mass rapes, and villages set ablaze. And her response to all those accusations of the same military that has now put her in prison once again was, and I quote, "Genocidal intent cannot be the only hypothesis." She also said that this case against Myanmar was precariously dependent on statements by refugees in camps in Bangladesh who she alleged may have provided inaccurate or exaggerated information. Can you imagine if women who have been raped and forced to watch their children die? Can you imagine someone who is a representative of the UN and the National League of Democracy, for her to say that that could be an exaggerated claim when there's thousands of these claims? It's hurtful, right? And it's very hard to reconcile. I don't know what kind of story is going to come out of this once the coup is figured out by the international community. I mean, if it's ever figured out and demonized and stopped. But I don't think that I personally cannot, and I'm a nobody, I'm just a scholar who's making observations here, obviously, but I don't think I can ever reconcile her role as a diplomat or as a Nobel Peace Prize winner or any of that, and ever again, just for that statement. I have had the honor of meeting several Rohingya refugees and children who there's no denying what happened to those children, because I was there with the medical practitioners who had to fix that mess. And you know, I was telling my colleagues earlier, there's a lot of very tragic stories, and one of them, again, trigger warning, was one of the children that I was working with was so brutally raped that their entire reproductive region had to be reconstructed, and the child was 2 years old, and this child was raped in front of her parents before her parents were killed in front of her, right? So there was just this domino effect of complete atrocity, and just it's just vile. It's not, it's inhumane. It's and I know that happened. There is no denying that happened, and that it was done by people who claim to be Buddhist and people who are military officials, right? And she was left to die in the jungle, and she didn't die. And I was there with the team who rescued her. And Aung San Suu Kyi thinks these type of claims with empirical evidence are exaggerated. I don't think you can come back from that. I don't think that in my eyes, can ever be forgiven, right? So let's move forward into what do the Rohingya want? They want religious freedom. They want to be able to practice Sunni Islam, and just be able to pray, be able to have their mosques again. They want their citizenship. They don't want second-class citizenship. They want their full citizenship. They want their lands back. They just want basic human rights. And although there have been offers for repatriation, there's no, as of right now, there's no way that could be executed in a just way, because number one, Myanmar is not offering citizenship, and now there's a whole coup against even, you know, the Buddhist majority. So I mean, it's a long shot now. And then of course they want education. It's the most beautiful thing I've seen. Well, and beautifully tragic really is, if you ask any child in those camps what they want, they just want to be teachers and doctors. And it's crazy to me how that is the main go-to. I mean, not that most children, you know, most children end up choosing careers of that type, but their reason for that is always because they want to help others, just like others have helped them. And I think it's so beautiful, and I find it so troubling that these children will never have an official education, or be able to live out, a lot of them won't be able to live out their dreams. So how does this stuff kind of get blurred, right? So I think it's important to note that in Myanmar, you have, there's a big control on media, right? About what gets in, what locals are allowed to watch. And part of that was actually spread by Wiratu, again, the Buddhist leader of 969 movement. I took this picture in his, at his monastery, right? So imagine walking into a monastery filled with like maybe, I think it was 2,200 monks. And these are the pictures that are on the bulletin, right? To kind of use as a scare tactic of like, look what Muslims do, right? Because that's, I mean, that's pretty much it. So this says Muslims take Christian children, rape and kill their mothers and fathers. That is actually a picture of children, Muslim children that were killed by ISIS. So not only is the information incorrect in that headline, I decided to take it a little further and look at who Theodore Shubat was. And Teddy Shubat is some like dude who has a YouTube channel, and he doesn't have an education. He doesn't have a college degree. He just blogs on the internet about white nationalism. He's anti-Jewish as well. Like, he is just beyond racist and prejudice, and not at all backed by any type of credentials. But that is the source that these Buddhist monks have decided to use to spread hatred about Muslims in Myanmar, and it works. It works. That is the saddest and craziest part, that while we think that we are growing into a more advanced society because we have so much access to information, there are people who are taking advantage of the fact that some people don't have the same access that we have as Americans. And it is causing, I mean, well, hi, we just watched it happen. Look at QAnon. Look at all these conspiracy theories. Look at all these. So all this misinformation, it's very dangerous. It's very, very dangerous. And every chance that you get as a student, as a human, as a parent, whatever you are, you always need to take the time to correct anyone. I know it's not easy, and I know it's sometimes you feel like it's not worth it. You need to always plant the seed, and you need to correct what is wrong, because misinformation does lead to the deaths of many, many people. So one of the things that he, Uashin Waratu, and is said often around Burma is, Myanmar, sorry, is that Muslims are rapists. Muslims are rapists. They have so many wives, and they use power of money to get women and attract women. That's all they do. All they care is about taking our Buddhist women. And Angela Davis in 1981, she said, in the history of the United States, the fraudulent rape charge stands out as one of the most formidable artifices invented by racism. The myth of the Black rapist was methodically conjured up whenever recurrent waves of violence and terror against the Black community have required convincing justifications. And I found this to resonate so much with this situation, and specifically because there's a lot of race issues here as well. Remember, I told you that he calls them kalars, which again, I hate saying that word because now I know what it means, but I want other people to know what it means. So it's like saying the N-word, right? And it is very much based on the skin tone of the Rohingya. A lot of this stuff, while I was there, I had a house mom, right, who was kind of like our, the lady who used to take care of us. And she would say that, that I needed to stop tanning and that I needed to wear more sunblock because I was starting to look dirty. And I was like, lady, I know I have fake blonde hair. My mom's looks like a white lady, but my dad is very much a Black man. And my grandmother was a fully Black woman. My dad was half Black. And I find it very offensive. Even if I didn't have a half Black father, right, I would still be offended by anyone assuming that darker skin means you look dirty. And that was actually something that I watched a lot of people in Myanmar take care of, right? They always wear their tonica on their face to make sure that they don't exceed a certain shade. There's a lot of anti-Blackness here. And then, of course, they say that they are protecting Buddhist women, right? That's the whole thing, is they need to protect Buddhist women from Muslims. But then Buddhist nuns do not have government support because they are not legally accepted as official nuns. So instead, they kind of just serve a role as a supportive system to the monks. There's a ton of issues, as we've already spoken, with rape in Myanmar. As a matter of fact, the Shan Human Rights Foundation reported 173 rapes of women and girls committed by the military alone between 1996 and 2001. And now those stats are 20 years old. So I can't even begin to wonder how many more there have been after that. And of course, there are 0 convictions and no crisis support is offered to victims of military rape. And then, of course, in 2015, while I was there, they banned interreligious marriage. So that Buddhist women who want to marry outside of Buddhist males, they have to post on a bulletin board where the whole community, at least 10 people from the community, have to agree that she can marry this man if they're not of the same faith. That's a thing in 2015. That was really a thing. And then, of course, karmic retribution in terms of Buddhist narratives. So if you reincarnate as a woman, it's karmic retribution for being such a piece of trash in your past life. You must have been such a horrible person. So there's a lot of contradictions here with, oh, we are protecting Buddhist women. There's a lot of other things that you need to work on, right? And here, for example, this is like my favorite picture of me ever, because if this doesn't define who I am, I don't know what does. Here I am wearing my feminist shirt and, making a 2-hour line to go put a little gold leaf on the Buddha. And that's as far as I got, because I was not allowed to touch the Buddha because I'm a woman. Of course, that's my fault because I should have known that, calling myself a religious studies scholar. But I just wasn't, I don't know why I thought I was going to be able to put the gold leaf on the Buddha, but nope, I was not. Ladies are not allowed to enter. So again, as I said, there's lots of issues, and these are other issues that contradict women's rights in Myanmar, right? So there's a lot to sift through here. And there's a lot of hypocrisy in terms of we are protecting Buddhist women from Muslims when they themselves need protection from Buddhist males. and the Myanmar laws. So I really like this this as well, this quote. It says, "The thing about stereotyping is it's usually just throwing rocks into a crowd and hoping to hit somebody who deserves it," right? So while I understand, because I'm not ignorant, I understand why stereotypes exist. You know, certain issues that occur in this world do make an impact. But what I find pretty amazing is that nobody's going to leave here today and say, wow, Buddhists are crazy, because Buddhists are not crazy, and Buddhists are not violent, and Buddhists are not any of these things, right? But ask yourself why so many people are so quick to judge Islam, right? Which is 1.8 billion people in this world, based off the actions of maybe 400,000 of them, right? Which is 0.010%, 0.010% of extremism. Granted, again, do I understand that there are certain events in history that cause these type of reactions? And of course I do. But what makes it worse is the people in power who speak on it and have the ability to reach the crowds and continue to hammer in that rhetoric about an entire group of people based off the actions of a very small group of people. Thank you for your time. Open to questions and, you know, all that fun stuff. This is my contact information. The best way to contact me is my email. I will never pick up this phone. I just have it there because I needed to fill up the space. But shoot me an email, and anything that you want to talk about, whether it's help with research or anything. I'm here. I want to propel people forward, and I want to advocate for the people who need advocating. Thank you.
So, Dr. Vash, would you like me to go ahead and introduce myself, or?
Yes. Yeah, you're in charge, Natasha. But I just wanted to just maybe recognize that our campus president was here, Dr. Brown, early on. And I just noticed she was.
We're not quite done yet, everyone. That's something that I wanted to make clear.
Yeah, and Dr. Lenigan of North Campus has posted a question on the chat, so maybe you could address it first. But yeah, the floor is yours, Natasha and Grisel.
Yeah, so my name is Natasha Estevez, and I am the program coordinator for the Institute for Civic Engagement and Democracy at the Padrón campus. And first of all, thank you so much, Grisel, for that very eye-opening presentation. I knew very little about the plight of the Rohingya before this, and listening to you, you're very eloquent. This presentation was very organized and went over very important points, like, you know, what it means to be stateless, as well as, I mean, I have so many thoughts because there's just so many parallels, even with our prior administration, when it comes to the spread of misinformation or generalizations or dehumanization and othering. So I have a million questions, but there are a couple questions I prepared, and those are some of the questions I wanted to ask you, and then I wanted to open the floor to more questions. So for those of you who are here, please stick around. Put your questions in the chat and I'll read them out loud. But the first question I wanted to ask Grisel is that, you know, I was in Thailand for 3 months, you know, and I stayed among some Buddhist monks, and I was in a very Buddhist country. Thailand is a very Buddhist country. And as you said, like, Buddhism is a very, you know, peaceful religion and philosophy, and it is unlike Buddhist principles for all of this to happen. But you use the term Buddhist nationalism, right? So I was wondering if you wanted to talk a little bit about, you know, the role that nationalism plays in feeling the Buddhist nationalism in Myanmar, so that our viewers, our audience can understand and maybe perhaps like separate Buddhism from what nationalism can do to people.
Right. That's actually a really great point, right? So I think that if you ask any Buddhist in Myanmar, which is the majority of the people, right, they will say these exact words: to be Burman is to be Buddhist. And that's it. To be Burman is to be Buddhist. So in order for you to be considered Burman, which is that's the large ethnic minority. So that's kind of like saying, and I could be wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure that Protestant and white is the largest in the United States. I'm pretty sure. I don't know. Somebody Google that.
Well, the demographics are changing, but I see where you're going with this. It would be as if to say to be Protestant and white is to be American is to be Protestant and white.
Exactly.
And so if you're not that, so that's where nationalism comes in. Because we see that happening in Myanmar, but we don't see that happening in Thailand or other Buddhist majority countries. So, so like especially when you're talking about the stereotyping quote, I think it's important for our viewers to realize that not all, just as ISIS is not a representation of Islam, right? What Buddhist nationalists are doing in Myanmar is not a representation of Buddhism. Nationalism is really here what's fueling things.
Although I will say this, and I am not equating all Buddhists to the specific Buddhist at all. I never want any student to ever have that kind of impression, but I think it's very important to note. This is the Theravada branch of Buddhism, right? The one that is found in Myanmar. Okay. And I did notice during my research, and again, this is on the scope of maybe 100 people, right? There are 58 million people in Myanmar. So I can't make judgments based off the 100 people that I spoke to, right? I can only tell you about my personal experience. I will say this, it went from microaggressive racism and prejudice against Muslims to complete, vitriol and hatred. So I didn't meet a single person who was accepting of the Muslim community in Myanmar while I was there. Of course, again, 100 people, right?
Right.
And I only went to three cities, and those were my experiences. None of them were okay with Muslims or anyone of dark complexion, including Black Americans, Africans. I mean, it went from microaggressive to kind of like insinuation, but, measured racism to complete blatant racism.
Right. Thank you.
And I'm sorry, one more thing.
No, go ahead, please.
Thailand. So I think I definitely think there is a specific link to Theravada Buddhism in this sense, right?
Okay. That branch of Buddhism. Exactly.
Which is also found in Thailand, where in South Thailand, there has been a ton of ethnic wars between Muslims and Buddhists as well. And those monks are actually military monks. It's a lot. And then also in Sri Lanka.
Right. No, I was going to say in southern Thailand where people are more melanated. My time in Thailand, I was struck, and I was with both Black and Latino students of various races. And when I was there, and we were there for 3 months, and one thing we were all struck by are the immense amount of skin lightening products all over Thailand. And we did notice that the indigenous folks of southern Thailand look very different than the ethnic tribes of like northern Thailand. And there is that strife. So anti-Blackness, I think this is a parallel that I guess that we can make, is a worldwide issue, and it exists in Asia as well. But my next question for you, if you don't mind, is I was wondering, we're talking about statelessness, right? People who do not have a polity, like a government, a state, again, not in the sense of a province or state like the United States, but like a government, a country that they fully belong to. And we're here just at the heels of this hopefully permanent ceasefire, right? And of the Israeli-Palestinian situation. So I wonder if there are any, since the Palestinians are a stateless people, do you see any parallels with the plight of the Palestinians for nationhood or for stateness or for autonomy, and the plight of the Rohingya? Do you see any parallels?
I do see parallels, but I don't like to compare them.
Yeah.
Right. But I don't like to necessarily compare them because, for example, the Palestinians were there first, period. Right. I mean, it wasn't until the British, well, there's another right there, boom, right? The British. The British invasion of both Palestine and Myanmar led to what we are seeing right now, right? So this is actually both of these issues are a product of colonization.
Right.
But in terms of, statehood, the Palestinians were robbed. And don't get me wrong, the Rohingya were robbed as well, but they were robbed by people who were also simultaneously there at the same time. Whereas with the Palestinians, I think it's an even worse situation because they were invaded.
Okay. Right. So there's an occupying
Occupation
element.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I'm wondering, you've worked with the United Nations, which is incredible. So another question I have, and then I'm going to look at the chat for questions and comments from the chat, is what do you believe a solution to this crisis would look like? Because one of the largest refugee camps in the world, if not the largest, I think it's the Cox's Bazar one in Bangladesh, right?
Yeah.
So what would a solution to this crisis look like? And the crisis involves the internally displaced people, refugees, there's the fake news, there's just the hatred, the vitriol, like you said. But the crisis overall, what would some solutions look like? And what role does the United Nations or other state actors or non-state actors play? I know it's a big question, but feel free to answer however you want, whatever comes to mind.
Okay, so I actually have a document where
with the answers to the crisis.
Yeah, I do. I don't have it here though, but off the top of my head, I would say the first thing that needs to be done is that Myanmar needs to be held accountable for everything that they have done.
Accountability.
Period. Like I would love to see this international court of justice or criminal court case come to fruition and to see them pay some type of price. But it just doesn't look good. And I hate to say that because the UN and international law and anything that has to do with international organizations, honestly, has left me in a place where while I still support everything they do and I continue to advocate and fundraise for women and minorities through UN Women and through the UNHCR, I get to a point sometimes where I don't think it's enough. I mean, I'm grateful. You always have to watch your words because you have to be so diplomatic, and it's very difficult for me to be the diplomatic when I'm talking about, the people that have endured the kinds of atrocities that the Rohingya have endured. But something needs to be done outside of emergency aid. I'm so tired of hearing emergency aid. Yes, that's great. Now we need to figure out how we're going to resettle these people. So where is Saudi Arabia? Where is Pakistan? Where is Indonesia? Where are all these Muslim countries, right? So it's not just the international community that I have organizations that I have an issue with. I also have an issue with fellow Muslims. Like, what is happening? Where are the predominantly Muslim countries that can say, hey, let me help you out, Bangladesh, and let me take some of our people.
With the resettlement. Yeah.
Right.
Because Bangladesh is if I'm not mistaken, if not the, but one of the most densely populated countries in the world. So it's already very populated to begin with.
It is. Right. They are not handling this well. And I'm actually going to the camps now, and it'll be, the first time that I have this experience post-COVID. I will say that I was very, very happy to hear that most of the refugees were actually vaccinated. So that was awesome to hear. But the international community needs to step it up and do more than just provide emergency aid, right? They need to actually see this international court case through. They need to hold Myanmar accountable. The United States needs to, number one, provide a lot more funding and let some refugees in. Canada has let some refugees in. France let some refugees in. There's no reason why the United States is not I mean, at the very least, take 120 refugees. I mean, that's not even close to what I would say, but you know, why not even one?
Well, Grisel, that's interesting you're bringing this up because Michael Medina in the chat has asked, what has been the most recent American response to this crisis?
Oh, so the most recent, which has been the only thing that the United States has done, and it was done by the Biden administration. So I guess I'm happy about it. You know, is they just said, I believe, I want to say the number is either 325 million or 925 million. I'm so sorry, but you're going to have to Google that because it was just in the news a couple days ago. So we're finally going to give some aid. But where is that aid going to? That aid is going straight to the UN and the UNHCR to keep providing housing in camps. So it's emergency aid. Again, it's not doing enough. And sanctions don't work on Myanmar on behalf of the United States. They don't care. They don't care whether we support them or not, whether we impose sanctions or not, because it doesn't affect them. Their biggest ball player is China. And the only one who would have control over that, but their interest is in the area, which is the Rakhine state. China's interest is in that state because they want to build on it. So they actually benefit from the Rohingya being gone.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. We have another question from Michael Medina. Would you say that the international community is too fearful to take direct action and prefer to ignore the atrocities?
No. Sorry.
Okay, so fear is not the factor. What do you think it is? What do you think, accounts for the indifference or apathy of the international community?
Because the Rohingya have nothing to offer them. There's nothing, what are they going to win? What, they get to be called great people? They get a little pat on the back from the international community? That's to me. And again, I'm a nobody, right? This is a hypothesis. This is an assumption, but there is no greater benefit for anyone to humanize the Rohingya. So they don't win anything for it.
Yeah. Wow. I'll give a few more, seconds in case anybody else wants to drop some questions in the chat. I don't know if Dr. Vash has any questions or comments.
I saw a question.
These have been great questions so far.
I saw a question drawing a parallel, which I thought was interesting, between Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang in China, who are not by definition stateless, but when they're overseas, the Chinese government essentially revokes or refuses to renew, I should say, their passports. So they fall into statelessness. And Rohingya, and the difference in kind of, in public policy attitudes by US politicians, because they constantly talk and kind of like really focus on Uyghurs in China, which has obviously geopolitical implications, but not so much about Rohingya in Myanmar. So maybe if you could elaborate on that.
Wait, so what's the question?
No, I'm just saying that you can, if you can draw parallels between Uyghurs in Xinjiang in China and Rohingya in Myanmar.
Well, so both of them are internally displaced people, right? Where they have been taken from their homes and placed into specific areas and kept in camps. And when we talk about this happening to other people, specifically, obviously the Jews during the Holocaust, we're horrified, and we sit back and we ask ourselves, how could everyone have let this happen, right? And back then, it used to take months and years for people to find out about these things, because obviously they didn't have social media and they didn't have instant information, where we do now. And what is being done? Nothing, right? And again, not nothing. I take that back, but not enough. And it just goes to show that the people don't really have power. I think that the biggest epiphany that I've had in this whole situation is that millions of us could be arguing for and protesting for a specific group of people, and then they kind of just shut us up a little bit by doing one little thing, and a lot of us become complacent, so we're not loud enough, right? And I think that that's the case with the Uyghurs. This is the case with the Rohingya. This is the case, it's unfortunately going to end up being the case for the Palestinians. Like, this is something that is constantly an issue. Look at what happened with George Floyd in the United States, right? All this mayhem, and sure, great, Chauvin is in prison and he was sentenced, and he was sentenced,
Some accountability.
Right. But what about the other hundreds of Black males or kids or women or of Black community members that have been killed and there was never any justice, right? Are we going back and fixing that now? No, right? But we silenced, right? Nobody's marching anymore. Nobody's really talking about it anymore,
The
right?
hashtags aren't trending, so.
Right. So unfortunately, without there being someone in power to take care of these issues and nip it in the bud and actually stand up for human rights, none of this is going anywhere. It's just going to kind of disappear from the media, but it's going to continue to happen. This has been happening to the Rohingya since 1977. And I'm not sure about the Uyghurs. How long has that been going on? I would say it's recent, right?
With who? With what?
With the Uyghurs.
I think it's relatively recent. I personally don't know. But I did want to let, especially all the students know, a reminder that at NICED, the Institute for Civic Engagement and Democracy, we have something called the Civic Action Scorecard. So if you go to mdc.edu/ICED, that's the plug that I'm going to put in here, you can access a scorecard. And basically what you see are different ways for you to remain civically engaged in issues that matter to you. So although, like Grisel is saying, you need, for one, sustained people power and then people in power to make actual significant contributions beyond band-aids like emergency aid. There are still little things that you can do. So for example, you can write to your representative, right? You get, with the Civic Action Scorecard, you can get points that eventually earn you awards from Miami-Dade College's ICED, right? Our department. You can write to your representative about, hey, I think that we should be welcoming in more Rohingya refugees, or if you really believe in the power of emergency aid, then we need more funding for aid. You can look at organizations like the International Rescue Committee. Grisel, I don't know what your thoughts are on them, but I'll then pass it over to you to let you know of other international non-governmental organizations or international organizations that are doing what they can to, at the very least, ameliorate, provide, because you have to think that a lot of children, the first 5, 6, 7 years of life are very formative, and even for teenagers. So for children in refugee camps who might spend, 10 to 15 years of their life in refugee camps, education is really important, and resources for education. That's the smallest percentage of humanitarian aid that when it comes to refugee camps, for all sorts of refugee camps, including Syrian ones, the smallest percentage of aid goes towards education. It's usually for emergency needs like shelter, food, right? So recently the International Rescue Committee partnered with Sesame Workshop to create early childhood education materials, so that when these individuals are old enough, and able to leave the camps, they have, an education that could set them up to become the teachers and doctors that they want to become to help their community members. But what I'm saying is that whether you donate to an NGO or write to your representative, there are small actions that you can do, to move the needle a little bit. And I'll let, since we only have a minute left, Grisel mention any other things that she believes that individuals in this call could do.
No, I think you nailed it. And if anyone wants to get involved in any kind of way, whether it's through donations or even going to refugee camps, definitely send me an email, and I will provide all the information. There are lots of wonderful NGOs who help rescue a lot of these children, and not just Rohingya, lots of different displaced people. So I have lots of resources, so please feel free to send me an email, and I will certainly give you a list of resources that will cater to whatever needs you have. in terms of advocacy.
Beautiful, amazing. Dr. Vash, are there any final words you want to say? And thank you so much, Grisel, for being here and sharing all this with our industry community.
Thank you, thank you.
No, thank you, Grisel. This was really eye-opening. I mean, I've been to a few of your presentations, but every time I listen to you, I learn something new, and I know you add and you kind of modify the slides. So this was very compelling. I already got a ton of private messages and a few emails from our faculty, and they want to use this presentation in their teaching. So definitely of educational value, community education value, and we definitely appreciate all you do and hope to work with you moving forward. And thanks to all our students, our faculty, scholars, community members that were part of this. And thank you, Natasha and Ileana as well. So
thank you.
All right, you guys have her email in the chat if you want to reach out to her. I know I am.
All right.
Have a great day, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day. I like it a lot.